The customer service area inside the Texas grocery store had gone unusually quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet people make when tension walks into the room before words do. Christopher pushed through the automatic doors, breathing hard, one hand gripping his phone while the other dragged through his hair in frustration. His expensive white shirt clung slightly to his back from the Texas heat outside, but he barely noticed. Right now, all he could think about was the missing envelope. $20,000. Gone. The cashier behind customer service pointed carefully toward the corner. That lady said she found something belonging to you? Christopher turned fast and froze. Mitchell stood there holding the brown leather envelope tightly against her chest with both hands. 2 grocery bags rested near her feet beside a tired-looking purse that had clearly lived through difficult seasons. Her expression stayed calm, but exhaustion sat underneath it like something heavy she had carried for years. Christopher walked toward her quickly. You found it? Mitchell lifted one eyebrow slightly. No, sir. It found me. A couple nearby shoppers glanced over immediately. Christopher reached for the envelope, opened it halfway and checked. Inside with visible panic. The money was still there. Every stack. Every bill. His shoulders loosened instantly before suspicion slipped out faster than manners. You didn't take anything? Mitchell's face changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for the entire atmosphere around them to tighten. She stared directly at him. Sir, she said carefully, poverty and dishonesty are not the same thing. The entire customer service area fell silent. Even Christopher looked stunned by his own question. Before we continue, if you still believe honesty matters even when life gets hard, take 1 second to like this video and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to reach more people. A short prayer. May God bless every person listening today who is trying to survive hard seasons without losing their character. May your honesty open doors money cannot buy, and may peace find your home when life feels heavy. Amen. Welcome to Love, Money, and Secret, where America's greatest stories and life lessons meet creativity and heart. If you're new to the family, we're grateful to have you here. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring more unforgettable stories your way. Christopher cleared his throat slowly, clearly regretting the question the moment it left his mouth. I didn't mean it like that, he said. Mitchell looked at him without blinking. Yes, you did. The honesty in her voice hit harder than yelling ever could. A woman standing near the lottery machine quietly shook her head like. Christopher had failed a test nobody warned him about. Christopher closed the envelope carefully this time. I apologize, he said, more sincere now. I've just been dealing with a difficult situation. Mitchell gave a small shrug. Aren't we all? That answer stayed with him longer than expected. Up close, Christopher noticed details he had missed at first. The grocery. Store shoes that had been worn down from long days. The tiredness beneath Mitchell's eyes. The phone screen lighting up again and again. With unpaid school notifications she quickly ignored. Life was clearly pressing on her from every direction. Yet she had still returned $20,000. Christopher looked at her differently now. Why would you bring this back? He asked quietly. Mitchell adjusted her grip on the grocery bags. Because my child is watching my life even when they ain't in the room. Christopher said nothing. Mitchell continued. And one day, when life gives them a chance to do wrong because times got hard, I need them remembering who raised them. That landed deep. For the first time in a long time, Christopher felt small in a way money could not fix. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick stack of cash. At least let me reward you. Mitchell looked down at the money like it personally offended her peace. No, sir. Christopher blinked. You're refusing it? I returned your money, she replied. Don't turn my character into a business transaction. Christopher slowly lowered his hand. Nobody refused him. Not investors. Not employees. Not people in his social circle. But this woman standing in a discount grocery store had just protected her dignity like it was worth more than $20,000. And somehow, that shook him more than losing the envelope ever had. Mitchell picked up her grocery bags and gave Christopher one final look before turning toward the exit. Have a good day, rich man, she said, and hold on to your money. Tighter. Texas parking lots don't play fair. A few people nearby laughed softly. Christopher surprised himself by smiling. Not the polished smile he used at charity events or business dinners. A real one. Mitchell pushed through the glass doors and stepped back into the heavy Texas heat. Christopher stood there for a moment holding the envelope in one hand while watching her walk across the parking lot. Something about her stayed in his chest. Not just her honesty, her strength. The kind people build after life keeps testing them without mercy. Christopher finally walked outside too. That was when he noticed the car. Older model. Faded paint. The front bumper looked tired enough to qualify for emotional support. Mitchell opened the driver's door, tossed her groceries inside, then sat quietly behind the wheel for 3 long seconds before starting the engine. The car made a rough coughing sound. Then silence. Mitchell closed her eyes slowly. "Lord," she whispered toward the steering wheel, "please don't. Embarrass me in front of the wealthy—" Christopher laughed before he could stop himself. Mitchell looked up immediately and pointed at him through the windshield. "Mind your expensive business." He raised both hands in surrender, still smiling. But the smile faded when he noticed something else. Exhaustion. Real exhaustion. The kind no makeup, good manners, or forced laughter could fully hide. And suddenly Christopher understood something uncomfortable. That woman truly needed the money, needed it badly. Yet she had returned every single dollar. That should have been the end of the story. But for Christopher, that was the beginning of the woman he could not stop thinking about. Texas heat had a way of making struggle feel personal. Mitchell stood inside the discount grocery store with one hand on her cart and the other holding her phone, staring at the total on the small screen near the checkout lane like the numbers had insulted her family. $38 for this, she muttered. Lord, these eggs better know how to sing. The cashier gave a tired smile. Mitchell smiled back, not because anything was funny enough, but because humor had always helped her keep her head lifted when life tried to press it down. She was 38, a black single mother, and every dollar in her purse already had a job before she even touched it. Rent had a job, gas had a job, food had a job. School payments stood in line too, waving their hands like they were more important than everybody else. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced down. Another reminder from her child's school. Payment due. Mitchell inhaled slowly through her nose and looked away before her face told too much truth in public. Not today, she whispered. We are not doing tears beside canned beans. She removed one item from the belt, then paused and put it back. Took away another, checked the total again, and sighed. The cashier asked softly, You want me to take something off? Mitchell shook her head. No, baby. Give me 1 second. I'm negotiating with my own bank account. A man behind her shifted impatiently. Mitchell heard him, but she did not turn around. She had learned long ago that embarrassment only grew when you fed it attention. Finally, she paid. The receipt came out long enough to look disrespectful, and Mitchell folded it with a small frown. Outside, the Texas sun greeted her like it had been waiting to argue. Heat rose from the pavement. Cars moved in and out of the shopping plaza. Somewhere nearby, a horn sounded twice. Mitchell balanced 2 grocery bags against her hip and adjusted her worn purse on her shoulder. Her phone buzzed again, but she ignored it this time. Everybody wants money today, she said under her breath. Even my phone acting like a bill collector. She crossed the parking lot slowly, careful not to let one bag tear. Just ahead, a clean black luxury SUV pulled away from the curb too quickly. A brown leather envelope slipped from the back seat area and landed near the tire stop. Mitchell stopped walking. Her eyes narrowed. Well now, she said softly, what kind of trouble is that? Mitchell looked around the parking lot first before bending down to pick up the brown leather envelope. Nobody called out. Nobody came running. The black SUV had already turned toward the main road and disappeared into Texas traffic like it had somewhere important to be. Mitchell held the envelope carefully in one hand while balancing her grocery bags in the other. It felt heavy, too heavy for paperwork. That better not be somebody's divorce documents, she muttered. I do not have the energy for cursed materials today. She moved closer to her car and opened the envelope slightly. The moment she saw the money, her entire body froze. Stacks. Neat stacks. Fresh bills packed tightly together. Mitchell immediately looked around again, this time faster. Cars passed. People walked in and out of stores. Nobody seemed to notice the $20,000 sitting in her hands. She swallowed hard. Oh, this is disrespectful, she whispered. Lord, why would you send this temptation while my account is outside fighting for survival? She leaned against her car door slowly, staring down at the cash. For one honest moment, her mind moved quickly through every problem waiting for her at home. School payments, past due bills, gas, groceries. The strange noise her car kept making every morning like it had lost faith in transportation. $20,000 could breathe life into every one of those problems. Mitchell closed her eyes briefly. Nobody would know. That thought arrived quietly, dangerously quietly. Her fingers tightened around the envelope. Then another voice rose louder inside her memory. Her mother's voice, a woman who could stretch one meal across 2 days and still teach children to keep their character intact. Hard times do not give permission to become somebody you cannot respect later. Mitchell exhaled slowly. Well, she said softly, there goes my temporary rich woman era. She opened the envelope again and searched carefully through the contents until she found a business card tucked inside. Christopher. The card was thick and expensive looking. One of those cards that practically announced money before a person even spoke. Mitchell stared at the name. "So, Christopher out here dropping enough money to restart people's lives," she murmured. She glanced once more toward the road where the SUV had disappeared. Then she looked down at the envelope again. The decision still hurt. But it was made. Mitchell grabbed her grocery bags, locked her car again, and headed back toward the grocery store entrance, holding the envelope tightly against her chest. Inside, she walked straight toward customer service. The young employee behind the counter blinked when Mitchell quietly placed the envelope down. "I think somebody very rich is having a terrible afternoon," Mitchell said. The employee looked confused. Mitchell leaned closer slightly, and judging by the weight of this envelope, he's probably panicking already. Just as the employee reached for the store phone, the front doors burst open. Christopher rushed inside, looking stressed, frustrated, and completely out of patience. Christopher moved across the grocery store quickly, scanning every face near customer service with the kind of tension money could not hide. The moment he saw the brown leather envelope in Mitchell's hands, relief hit his face so hard it almost looked painful. "You found it?" he asked immediately. He asked, one eyebrow. "No, sir." "It found me." Christopher stepped closer and took the envelope carefully before, opening it halfway. His fingers moved fast through the stacks of money. Everything was still there. His shoulders loosened instantly, but suspicion slipped out before gratitude fully arrived. "You didn't take anything?" The question landed between them like a slap nobody expected. Mitchell stared at him quietly, not shocked, not loud, just disappointed in a way that made Christopher regret himself immediately. "Excuse me?" she asked. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," Mitchell replied calmly. "You just didn't expect me to hear it out loud." The nearby cashier suddenly became very interested in organizing receipts that were already organized. Christopher rubbed one hand across his jaw. "I apologize," he said. "I've had a difficult day." Mitchell crossed her arms slowly. "Sir, poverty and dishonesty are not the same thing." Silence spread around the customer service area. A woman standing nearby nodded under her breath like Mitchell had. Spoken for half the building. Christopher looked embarrassed now. Not fake embarrassed, real embarrassed. Mitchell picked up one grocery bag before continuing. "I counted the money because I needed to know whether I was holding rent money, drug money, or the type of money that gets people chased. Through parking lots." Christopher accidentally laughed once before catching himself. Mitchell pointed lightly toward him. "Don't get comfortable. I'm still irritated." That surprised him again. Most people softened around his money. Mitchell became sharper around it. Christopher closed the envelope carefully. "Why return it?" he asked more quietly this time. Mitchell adjusted the grocery bag against her shoulder. "Because I'm raising my child to understand that hard seasons do not cancel character." Christopher looked at her differently after that. The exhaustion in her face was visible now. The worn purse, the tired eyes, the strain she carried beneath the jokes. This woman clearly needed help, yet she had returned $20,000 without taking a single bill. Christopher reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out cash. "At least let me thank you properly." Mitchell immediately shook her head. "No, sir, it's the least I can do." "No," she repeated firmly. "I returned your money. Don't turn my integrity into a transaction." Christopher slowly lowered his hand. Nobody talked to him like this. Nobody refused him like this either. Mitchell picked up her second grocery bag and headed toward the exit without another word. Christopher turned instinctively to watch her leave. That was when he noticed the older car waiting for her outside, and the moment the engine struggled to start, something inside his chest shifted in a way he did not understand yet. Christopher stood outside the grocery store with the brown leather envelope in his hand, but his attention was no longer on the money. It was on Mitchell. She sat in her older car, gripping the steering wheel like she was trying to talk patience into the engine. The car coughed once, paused, then started with a tired sound that made Christopher wince. Mitchell looked through the windshield and caught him watching. "Mind your expensive business," she called out. Christopher raised one hand slightly, but he did not move. He should have gone back to his office. He had calls waiting, documents waiting, people waiting to hear his calm voice pretend everything was under control. That was the life he understood. But Mitchell did not fit into that life. She had just returned $20,000 she clearly needed, refused a reward, corrected him without fear, and left him feeling poorer than he had felt in years. Christopher walked toward his SUV, sat behind the wheel, and stared ahead. "Go home," he told himself. Mitchell's car pulled out of the shopping plaza. Christopher waited. Then curiosity won against good judgment. He followed at a careful distance, not close enough to scare her, but close enough to keep her car in sight. He knew it was wrong. He knew there was no polite way to explain it. Still, something about Mitchell's strength had unsettled him. The streets changed as they drove. The clean shopping lanes and polished storefronts slowly gave way too. Smaller roads, aging signs, apartment buildings, corner stores, church, boards, children riding bikes, and porch chairs turned toward the street. Like the whole neighborhood had eyes, Christopher slowed his SUV. This was not his world, but it was alive in a way his world rarely felt. Mitchell pulled into a modest apartment complex and parked near the side. Christopher stopped across the street, partly hidden behind a parked truck. He expected her to go inside and disappear. She did not. Mitchell carried her groceries toward the stairs, then stopped when she saw a struggling older woman with bags near the walkway. Without hesitation, Mitchell set her own bags down and helped carry the woman's load first. Christopher leaned forward. The woman said something that made Mitchell laugh. Mitchell waved it off, picked up her own groceries again, and disappeared inside. A few minutes later, she came back out carrying one grocery item in her hand. She crossed toward another doorway and handed it over with no speech, no big display, no performance. Christopher sat there quietly. This woman needed help, yet she kept giving help. When Mitchell returned to her car, she opened the hood and stared down at the engine. The car made one weak clicking sound. Mitchell placed both hands on her hips. "You better start acting employed," she said. Christopher laughed softly inside his SUV. Then the engine went silent. Mitchell's car had finally refused to move. Mitchell stood beside the open hood of her car, staring down into the engine like disappointment alone might fix it. "Now see," she muttered, "this is why I talk nice to you every morning." One difficult afternoon, and suddenly you quit your job, the car answered with silence. Across the street, Christopher sat gripping his steering wheel while arguing with himself. Leave. That was the reasonable choice. But before reason could fully win, his SUV door opened. Christopher crossed the street carefully, already aware this conversation could go badly within seconds. Mitchell looked up immediately. The moment she saw him approaching, her eyes narrowed hard. "Oh, absolutely not." Christopher stopped a few feet away. "I can explain. You followed me home." When you say it like that, it sounds concerning, because it is concerning. Christopher rubbed the back of his neck once. "I know. I shouldn't have done it." Mitchell folded her arms. There's no version of this that sounds church-approved. Despite herself, she almost smiled after saying it. Christopher noticed. That tiny, almost smile gave him courage. He started carefully. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you did." Mitchell looked away toward the engine. "Well, your money made a dramatic entrance into my afternoon. Hard to forget." "No," Christopher said quietly. "Not the money. That caught her attention for half a second before she recovered. "Sir, don't start talking like a man who owns expensive watches and poor decisions." Christopher laughed unexpectedly. The sound surprised both of them. Mitchell sighed and leaned against the car. The heat had softened slightly now that evening was getting closer, but exhaustion still rested heavily on her face. Christopher noticed it more, clearly outside the grocery store lights. "You really shouldn't have followed me," she said. "You're right, you keep agreeing with me. Rich people usually fight harder." "We do," Christopher admitted. "It's one of our less charming qualities." Mitchell shook her head once. "You got jokes now. I'm trying to survive this conversation." That almost smile returned again. The car suddenly made another weak clicking sound when Mitchell tried the key. Nothing else. She closed her eyes slowly. "Wonderful," she whispered. "My vehicle has entered retirement. Without notice?" Christopher glanced toward the engine. "Can I help?" "You already helped by returning to your side of town." "I meant with the car." Mitchell hesitated. Pride sat all over her face. Christopher recognized it immediately, because he carried his own version of it every day. "I can call somebody," he offered carefully. Mitchell looked at him suspiciously. "And what's the catch?" "No catch." Christopher, rich men, always say. "No catch, right before life sends the invoice. I'm not trying to buy your gratitude." She studied him for a long moment. For the first time since meeting him, Christopher looked less like a millionaire and more like a man honestly trying not to make another mistake. Mitchell finally sighed. "Fine, you can call somebody, but if you try to rescue me emotionally too, I'm charging you." Christopher smiled. "That feels fair." A short time later, the mechanic arrived and started checking the car. Mitchell stayed near the hood, while Christopher quietly stepped aside with the mechanic for a private conversation. A few folded bills changed hands before Mitchell noticed. Her eyes narrowed instantly. Christopher had secretly paid for the repairs. Mitchell walked toward Christopher immediately after spotting the money exchange. "Oh no," she said, pointing at him. "Absolutely not. Did you pay that man?" Christopher looked guilty for exactly 2 seconds. "I may have participated financially." Mitchell stared at him. That was a rich person sentence? I was trying to soften the impact. You secretly paid my mechanic. I secretly prevented you from being stranded. Mitchell pressed her lips together, fighting a smile she clearly did not. Want him earning this early. You are irritating in a very organized way, she said. Christopher laughed quietly. The mechanic continued working under the hood while evening settled. Slowly over the apartment complex, somewhere nearby, music drifted. Through an open window, a child laughed in the distance. The smell of barbecue carried lightly through the warm air. Christopher noticed how different this felt from his usual nights. No private dining rooms, no forced conversations, no people pretending to enjoy each other while checking stock prices between bites of expensive food. Just real life happening around him. Mitchell leaned beside the car and shook her head. You know what's funny? She said. People see single mothers struggling and immediately think we made terrible decisions. Christopher listened carefully. They don't think maybe life simply got heavy, she continued. Everything costs money, groceries expensive, gas expensive, existing expensive. She looked toward him. Even breathing in Texas feels overpriced. Christopher smiled. Mitchell noticed and pointed at him again. Don't laugh too hard. Your air conditioning money is different from mine. I deserve that. Yes, you do. For a moment, neither spoke. Christopher glanced around the apartment complex. People waved at Mitchell while walking past. Somebody shouted hello from a balcony. Mitchell answered naturally every time, like this entire place moved together in ways his world never did. You know everybody here? He asked. Not everybody, she replied. Just enough people to know who makes the good potato salad and who should not be trusted near seasoning. Christopher laughed again. Then his expression softened slightly. My world doesn't really work like this. Mitchell studied him. What does your world work like? Christopher leaned back against his SUV. Quiet rooms. Expensive dinners. People trying very hard to impress each other. He paused briefly. A lot of smiling without much. Honesty. Mitchell looked surprised by the answer. You lonely? She asked directly. Christopher hesitated longer than expected. Yes. The honesty caught both of them off guard. Mitchell's expression softened for the first time that evening. Well, she said gently, money good for paying bills. It just ain't very. Talented at holding people together. Christopher looked at her differently after that. Not as the woman who returned his money. Not as a struggling single mother. Just Mitchell. Strong, funny, tired, honest, and somehow easier to talk to than anyone he had known in years. The mechanic finally closed the hood. Mitchell's car started smoothly this time. But long after Christopher drove home to his large silent house, both of them kept thinking about each other far more than they intended. Christopher lasted 2 full days before doing exactly what Mitchell had warned him not to do. He told himself he was being thoughtful. He told himself it was harmless. He told himself groceries were practical, not dramatic. That was why Mitchell came home from work one evening and found 3 grocery bags sitting neatly outside her apartment door. Fresh fruit, chicken, rice, vegetables. A pack of eggs sitting on top like somebody had made a financial statement. Mitchell stared at the bags for a long moment. She did not need a detective. Only one man in her life had recently watched her argue with grocery, prices, and drive away in a car that sounded personally offended by movement. She picked up her phone. Christopher answered on the second ring. Hello, Mitchell. Did you send groceries to my door? Silence. Mitchell nodded slowly, even though he could not see her. That pause just testified against you. Christopher cleared his throat. I thought it might help. You thought wrong in luxury. I didn't mean to offend you. I know that. That's why I'm talking calmly instead of praying for patience out loud. Christopher sat back in his office chair, looking out over the city through glass walls that suddenly felt cold. Mitchell continued. Listen to me carefully. I am not a project. I am not your charity dinner speech. I am not a sad story you fix so you can sleep better. His face changed. I never saw you that way. But you helped me like you did. That sentence landed clean. Christopher said nothing for a moment. Mitchell's voice softened, but it stayed firm. I appreciate kindness. I really do. But kindness without respect starts. Feeling like control, Christopher lowered his head. You're right, I know. That made him smile despite himself. Mitchell looked at the groceries again and sighed. I'm keeping the eggs, though. Egg prices are disrespectful. Christopher laughed softly. That seems fair. But after today, you ask before helping me. You hear me? I hear you no surprise rescue missions, no secret payments, no rich man magic tricks. I understand. And don't say that unless you mean it. Christopher's voice became quieter. I mean it. For the first time, Mitchell believed him a little. A few days passed before he called again. This time he did not offer money. He asked how her week had been. He listened while she talked. About work, bills, traffic, and how her car had started behaving just. Humble enough to stay employed. Christopher laughed, but mostly he listened. That mattered. By Saturday afternoon, Mitchell surprised him. There's a cookout near my building, she said. Nothing fancy. Just food, music, and people minding everybody's business. Christopher hesitated. Are you inviting me? I'm giving you a chance not to embarrass yourself. I'll take it. Good. Wear regular shoes. And don't bring a speech. For the first time, Christopher understood that being allowed into. Mitchell's world was not rescue. It was trust. Christopher almost turned his SUV around twice before reaching Mitchell's apartment complex. Not because he was afraid of danger, because he was afraid of looking stupid. He had spent most of his life inside rooms where he already understood. The rules, expensive restaurants, business meetings, charity events filled with polished smiles and careful conversations. This was different. The moment he stepped out of the SUV, music floated through the warm Texas evening air. Smoke from the grill drifted across the parking lot. Folding chairs lined the sidewalks. People laughed loudly without, apologizing for it. Christopher adjusted his shirt nervously. Mitchell noticed immediately. Oh no, she said, laughing softly. You came dressed like somebody about to sell insurance. Christopher looked down at himself. This is casual for me. That explains so much. He followed her toward the cookout while trying not to look overwhelmed. People glanced at him carefully at first. Not hostile, just curious. A wealthy white man walking into a black community space beside. Mitchell naturally raised questions nobody needed to say out loud. Christopher felt every stare. Mitchell leaned closer while walking. Relax, she whispered. Nobody bites unless the potato salad terrible. That somehow made me more nervous. Mitchell laughed. Christopher noticed something quickly. Nobody here cared about his watch, his money, or the kind of car he drove. Conversations happened, loudly, honestly, and sometimes all at once. Somebody argued passionately about barbecue sauce while another person defended homemade lemonade like it was a family legacy. Christopher stood there trying to balance a paper plate overloaded with food. He looked down uncertainly. Is this plate structurally safe? Mitchell nearly choked, laughing. Christopher, this plate survived church cookouts, family reunions, and tax season stress. Trust the process. He nodded seriously. I respect the plate now. That made Mitchell laugh harder. Slowly, the tension around him eased. Christopher helped carry folding chairs without being asked. He picked up trash when the wind knocked cups over. He listened more than he talked. And when the barbecue sauce turned out far spicier than expected, he tried to stay dignified through the pain. Mitchell watched him coughing quietly near the drink cooler. You all right? Christopher's eyes watered slightly. I underestimated the seasoning situation. You sweating in cursive right now? He laughed through the coughing. Your people are trying to kill me politely. Our people believe flavor builds character. For the first time in years, Christopher got to perform. No polished image, no expensive mask, just laughter. Just people. Just warmth. Later, while music played softly nearby, Christopher sat beside Mitchell watching the evening settle around the apartment complex. You fit better than I expected, Mitchell admitted. Christopher looked over at her. Low standards? No, she said honestly. You listened. That mattered more than he realized. Mitchell studied him quietly after that, not as a millionaire, not as the man who lost $20,000, but as somebody genuinely trying to become better without demanding praise for it. And slowly, against her better judgment, Mitchell began trusting him emotionally. A week after the cookout, Christopher stood outside Mitchell's apartment building holding 2 tickets to a charity gala and the expression of a man fully aware he might get rejected immediately. Mitchell opened the door and looked at him carefully. What are you selling? Christopher lifted the tickets. An evening of uncomfortable rich people and overpriced chicken. Mitchell folded her arms. You make your world sound very stressful. It is... She stared at the tickets another moment. You asking me on a date? Christopher paused. I'm asking you to survive a charity dinner with me. That sounds harder than dating. He smiled. Probably. Mitchell should have said no. Everything about Christopher's world felt dangerous in a different way than poverty did. In her experience, wealthy spaces smiled politely while judging people quietly. Still, curiosity won. 2 nights later, Mitchell stepped into the hotel ballroom beside Christopher, wearing a simple, elegant black dress that made the entire Room noticed her immediately. Christopher noticed too. For a second, he forgot how conversations worked. Mitchell looked at him sideways. "Close your mouth before these rich women think you lost oxygen." Christopher laughed softly and offered his arm. The ballroom looked exactly how Mitchell expected. Expensive flowers, crystal glasses, soft music. People speaking carefully like every sentence had gone through approval first. Christopher greeted people naturally, but Mitchell noticed the reactions around her almost instantly. Some smiles were genuine. Some were confused. Some carried the kind of politeness that barely covered discomfort. One woman glanced at Mitchell, then at Christopher, clearly trying to calculate how a woman like Mitchell fit beside a man like him. Mitchell had dealt with that look before. Christopher noticed it too, and for the first time embarrassment touched him in a way business failures never had. Not because of Mitchell, because he suddenly saw how cold his world could feel to somebody outside it. At dinner, another woman smiled tightly toward Mitchell. "It's honestly inspiring," she said carefully, "that you returned all that money." Mitchell heard the hidden meaning immediately. As if honesty coming from someone struggling financially deserved extra applause. Christopher heard it too. The table quieted. Mitchell smiled politely and placed her glass down. "Character doesn't check income before it shows up," she said calmly. Silence. One man suddenly became deeply interested in his water. Christopher looked at Mitchell with open admiration he could no longer hide. Not because she defended herself, because she did it with dignity instead of bitterness. Mitchell caught him staring. "What? You amaze me!" She looked away quickly before her expression softened too much. Later that evening, Christopher stood near the ballroom entrance, watching wealthy guests move through the room with polished smiles and rehearse conversations. For years, he had believed this world represented success. Now it felt strangely empty beside the honesty, humor, warmth, and strength Mitchell carried naturally without money. And for the first time in his life, Christopher realized he no longer viewed his own world the same way. Christopher did not sleep well after the charity gala. It was not because of the stares Mitchell received. Those bothered him, but they were not the only thing keeping his mind awake. It was the envelope. The $20,000 had come from one of his charity accounts, the same account connected to a program meant to help struggling families across Texas. Christopher had trusted the people around him to handle the details, sign the forms, move the funds, and protect the purpose behind the money. Now he was no longer sure he had trusted the right people. The next morning, Christopher sat alone in his office before anyone else arrived. The city looked clean and bright through the tall glass windows, but his mood did not match it. He opened the records again. Transfer dates, receipt numbers, donation reports. The same $20,000 appeared in one file as approved. Support money, but another report showed it as already delivered. Christopher leaned closer to the screen. "That doesn't make sense," he muttered. He checked again. The numbers did not change. Someone had marked the money as handled before it ever left his possession. The envelope Mitchell found had not simply been misplaced. It had been part of a careless, dishonest move that somebody hoped would disappear quietly. Christopher's jaw tightened. He remembered Mitchell standing in the grocery store, holding that envelope with both hands while life was pressing hard against her. He remembered his own insulting question. "You didn't take anything?" Shame moved through him again. He picked up the business card from his desk and stared at his own name printed on it. That card had connected Mitchell to him, but it had also connected her to a mess she had never asked to touch. By noon, Christopher had gone through enough records to see the pattern. A report had been changed. A delivery note had been signed too early. The charity money had been moving through hands that treated poor families like numbers instead of people. His anger grew colder. If Mitchell had kept even one bill, she would have looked guilty. If she had walked away and left the envelope outside, anyone could have taken it. If Christopher had listened to the wrong voices, people might have pointed straight at her and called her the problem. He stood slowly from his chair. The thought made him sick. Mitchell had not only returned money. She had protected the truth before she even knew there was a truth to protect. Christopher looked back at the records, then at the envelope resting on his desk. For the first time, he understood something dangerous. Mitchell could have been blamed for everything. By the end of the week, tension had spread quietly through Christopher's business circle. Meetings became shorter. Voices became careful. People who normally spoke with confidence suddenly started choosing their words like they were walking across thin ice. Christopher noticed all of it. But this time, he was no longer interested in protecting appearances. He was interested in the truth. He spent days reviewing financial records connected to the charity program until the pattern became impossible to ignore. Money meant for struggling families had been handled carelessly, signed off too early, and moved through people who assumed nobody would question them. Christopher questioned everything now, especially after realizing how close Mitchell had come to being dragged into the mess without even knowing it. One afternoon, he asked Mitchell to meet him outside a small cafe near her neighborhood. The moment she sat down, she looked at his face and frowned slightly. That expression means either taxes or drama, Christopher exhaled slowly. Probably both. Mitchell leaned back in her chair. Well, go ahead. My nerves already paid rent this month. Despite the joke, Christopher stayed serious. He explained the missing charity money carefully, the altered records, the careless handling, the investigation happening quietly behind closed doors. Mitchell listened without interrupting. Then her expression slowly changed. You're telling me that envelope was connected to charity money? Christopher nodded. And if things had gone differently, he admitted, people could have blamed you for it. Mitchell stared at him for several seconds. You accused me over groceries, she said. Imagine what rich people would have done over charity money? Christopher lowered his eyes briefly. You're right. The honesty in his voice softened her anger before it could fully grow. A few days later, Christopher publicly corrected the situation during a charity board meeting. No dramatic performance, no fake speech, just truth. The financial mishandling was exposed. The responsible person lost their position immediately, and the missing funds were restored to the families they were meant to help. Christopher also made one thing painfully clear to everyone in that room. Mitchell had returned every dollar without taking anything. Not because she expected praise. Not because cameras were watching. Because her character would not let her do otherwise. Word spread faster than Christopher expected. People who once would have overlooked Mitchell's honesty now spoke about her with admiration. Mitchell herself did not seem impressed by the attention. Good, she said when Christopher told her everything had been corrected. Now people can stop acting foolish with money meant for struggling families. Christopher looked at her quietly. Most people would have focused on the praise. Mitchell focused on the families. That hit him deeply. As she sat across from him sipping sweet tea like none of this had changed her, Christopher felt something rise inside his chest that went beyond admiration. It was respect so deep it almost hurt. After the charity situation was resolved, something changed quietly between Christopher and Mitchell. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just enough for both of them to notice it in small moments. Christopher started spending more time near Mitchell's neighborhood, not because he needed an excuse anymore, but because peace seemed easier to find around her. Sometimes they grabbed coffee. Sometimes they sat outside her apartment building talking while evenings settled over the parking lot. And sometimes they simply existed beside each other without needing to impress anyone. That part surprised Christopher most. Around Mitchell, silence never felt like failure. One evening, they sat on folding chairs outside while warm Texas wind moved softly through the complex. Music played faintly from somewhere nearby, and children laughed in the distance. Christopher loosened his tie slightly. Mitchell noticed immediately. Look at you, she said. Your rich man uniform finally letting you breathe? Christopher smiled. You enjoy insulting my wardrobe. It keeps you humble. He laughed softly, but his expression faded into something more thoughtful after a moment. What? Mitchell asked. Christopher leaned forward slowly, elbows resting on his knees. I spent most of my life believing success meant money, status, respect. He glanced toward her. But lately I've been realizing something uncomfortable. Mitchell waited quietly. I know people with giant houses who don't speak to their own families. He shook his head once. People with expensive marriages and empty lives. People who smile publicly and barely survive privately. Mitchell looked down at her hands. That kind of lonely expensive, she said softly. Christopher nodded. Then he looked directly at her. And meanwhile you're over here helping neighbors while your own bills are stressing you out. Mitchell shrugged lightly. That's just life. No, Christopher replied. That's character. The sincerity in his voice made Mitchell glance away quickly. For the first time in a long time, compliments from a man did not feel like manipulation to her. That scared her a little. Christopher leaned back again and laughed quietly to himself. What? I just realized something. Mitchell narrowed her eyes suspiciously. Should I prepare emotionally? Probably. She folded her arms. Go ahead. Christopher looked at her carefully before speaking. I thought I was the wealthy one between us. Mitchell smirked immediately. You absolutely are. Have you seen your watch? He laughed. I mean really wealthy, his voice softened. You've got honesty, warmth, people who genuinely love you, peace in places money can't. He shook his head slightly. Meanwhile, I had expensive furniture and silence. Mitchell's expression changed slowly after hearing that. The joke left her face. Christopher looked unusually vulnerable sitting there under the parking lot lights, and something inside Mitchell softened before she could stop it. Without thinking too hard about it, she reached over lightly. Her hand rested gently against his. Christopher looked down at it, then back at her. Neither moved away. And for the first time, the feeling between them no longer looked like friendship trying to behave itself. After that evening outside Mitchell's apartment, neither of them rushed to name what was happening. That made it feel safer. Christopher did not arrive the next day with flowers, speeches, or some expensive gesture that would make Mitchell raise one eyebrow and send him back to emotional training. Instead, he started showing up in smaller ways. Respectful ways. He walked beside her through the grocery store without reaching for his wallet unless she asked. The first time he tried to pick up a pack of eggs, Mitchell looked at him sharply. "Careful," she said. "Those eggs got history between us." Christopher smiled and put them gently into the cart. "I respect their importance. You better. These eggs have survived more financial conversations than some adults." He laughed, and Mitchell laughed too, freely this time. That was new. Some afternoons, Christopher met her after school pickup. He never tried to take over. He simply stood beside her, listened, and learned the rhythm of her life. Mitchell noticed that. She noticed how he stopped making assumptions, how he asked before helping, how he waited instead of pushing. That kind of patience reached places money never could. One Saturday, Mitchell invited him over while she attempted cornbread. She warned him ahead of time that confidence did not always equal success in the kitchen. When the cornbread came out darker than planned, Christopher stared at it with careful respect. Mitchell narrowed her eyes. "Say what you need to say." Christopher cleared his throat. "It has a strong personality." Mitchell grabbed a dish towel and pointed it at him. "That is the fanciest insult I ever heard." "I was trying to survive. You rich men fear burnt edges? I fear your reaction more." She laughed so hard she had to lean against the counter. Moments like that built something between them. Not the loud kind of. Romance people perform for attention. Something quieter, warmer, stronger. Christopher became emotionally safe because he learned how to stay without controlling the room. Mitchell relaxed because she no longer felt studied like a problem. She felt seen as a woman, a whole woman. Funny, tired, loving, sharp, tender when trust gave her permission. One evening, after they finished carrying groceries inside, Christopher stood near the doorway longer than usual. Mitchell noticed immediately. "You're standing like a man with a speech trapped in his chest." Christopher smiled nervously. "You read people too well. I had to. Life don't send warnings before nonsense." He looked at her, and his voice softened. "There's something I want to tell you." Mitchell's teasing faded slightly. For once, she did not run from the quiet. She only nodded. "All right, Christopher. Say it plain." The Texas evening felt softer than usual. Warm wind moved slowly through the apartment complex while distant. Music drifted somewhere beyond the parking lot. Mitchell sat beside Christopher on the small porch outside her apartment, waiting for him to finally say whatever had been sitting heavily in his chest all week. Christopher leaned forward slightly, hands clasped together. For a man who negotiated business deals without fear, he suddenly looked nervous enough to forget his own name. Mitchell noticed immediately. "You all right?" she asked. "You breathing like somebody about to confess to tax fraud." Christopher laughed quietly. "No crimes tonight. Well, that's comforting." He shook his head once, smiling, but the smile faded into honesty after a moment. "When I first met you," he said carefully, "I thought I understood people." Mitchell folded one leg beneath herself and listened. "I thought success meant control, money, respect." He exhaled slowly. "But you walked into my life holding $20,000 you could have kept, and somehow you became the first person in years who did me feel small in a good way." Mitchell looked down briefly. Christopher continued. "You challenged me without trying to impress me. You corrected me when I deserved it. You made me realize how disconnected I had become from real people." Mitchell tried to lighten the moment. "So basically I bullied you into emotional growth." Christopher laughed. "Honestly, a little. That's fair." But the humor faded naturally between them, leaving something softer behind. Christopher looked directly at her now. "You made me want to become better." The words settled deeply. Not dramatic, not polished. Real. Mitchell swallowed once before speaking. "You know what's strange?" she admitted quietly. "Most people hear single mother and immediately assume struggle, mistakes, sadness." She looked toward him. "You looked at me and still saw value," Christopher answered immediately. "How could I not?" That nearly broke the last emotional wall Mitchell had left. She leaned back slowly in her chair, blinking against feelings she usually kept guarded. You're dangerous, she muttered. Christopher frowned slightly. That sounds negative. It is negative, she said softly, because now I'm getting attached to a man who wears watches worth rent money. He smiled. I can wear cheaper watches. No, you cannot. Your people would hold a meeting. Christopher laughed again, but this time Mitchell reached for his hand. Before the moment could escape, their fingers settled together naturally. No performance, no audience, just warmth. Christopher looked down quietly, almost overwhelmed by how peaceful such a simple touch could feel. Mitchell squeezed his hand lightly. Don't make this weird, she warned gently. I'm trying very hard not to— Good. They sat there together under the warm Texas night. Hands joined quietly while years of loneliness slowly loosened their grip on both of them. And somewhere between the laughter, honesty, and silence, love finally stopped pretending to be friendship. Life did not suddenly become perfect for Mitchell and Christopher after at night. Bills still existed. Traffic still tested people's faith daily. Mitchell's car still made occasional noises that sounded emotionally exhausted. But something important had changed. Neither of them carried life alone anymore. Christopher stopped trying to prove himself through money. Instead, he learned how to show up consistently. Grocery runs became normal. Quiet dinners became routine. Long conversations outside Mitchell's apartment stretched late into warm Texas nights filled with laughter and honesty. And little by little, the people around Mitchell stopped looking at Christopher like a visitor. Now they waved first. That mattered to him more than approval from wealthy strangers ever had. One evening during another community cookout, Christopher stood beside the grill attempting to help, while Mitchell watched carefully. You look nervous around barbecue sauce, she said. I respect how dangerous it can become. That sauce humbled you once already, and I learned from my mistakes. Mitchell smiled warmly at him, not cautiously, not defensively, just warmly. Christopher noticed the difference immediately. Later that evening, music played softly while folding chairs circled the parking lot. Christopher sat beside Mitchell watching people laugh, eat, and argue passionately over whose cooking deserved praise. For years, he had chased environments designed to look impressive. Now peace looked like this. Simple conversations, real people. A woman beside him who had once returned enough money to change her life because her integrity mattered more than temporary relief. Christopher turned toward Mitchell quietly. You know, he said, if you had kept that envelope, nobody here would have blamed you. Mitchell shrugged lightly. Maybe not, but you still brought it back. She looked at him carefully before answering. My child is watching how I survive hard seasons. That matters more than easy money. Christopher smiled slowly. That right there is why I love you. Mitchell blinked once, then narrowed her eyes playfully. You just slipped love into the conversation like I wouldn't notice. I was hoping confidence would carry me through. It did not. Christopher laughed nervously. Mitchell tried to hold her serious expression a few seconds longer before failing completely. I love you too, she admitted softly. The words settled around them naturally, without fear of performance. Just truth. Christopher leaned closer and rested his forehead gently against hers while the sounds of laughter and music continued around them. For the first time in years, his life felt full in a way success had never managed to create. Mitchell kept her dignity. Christopher became a better man. Justice had been served, and the $20,000 that once looked like financial rescue had actually revealed something far greater than money. Character. Love. Peace. Before we end this story, if this touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video with somebody who still believes good people exist. Because sometimes the person with the least reason to do right becomes the reason somebody else believes in goodness again. The money could have changed Mitchell's life for a moment, but her honesty changed both their lives forever.